What is up, y'all? Kevin here with the Deerfield Fly Shop. I hope y'all are doing well today. Just here with a little bit of a river report out here on the Deerfield today, and just some tips for what I'm seeing out here. Flows are pretty consistent as they've been out here on the Fife Brook stretch. It's coming up now. It's going to get to about 1,000 for the day, which has been about what it's been, give or take 100 and a few hundred in either direction for the past couple weeks here. As you can probably hear, and I hope the audio is not too bad here, what I'd really love to be talking about today actually is the wind. We've kind of hit that point here in Western Mass through a lot of these fisheries, especially on the big rivers like the Dee, where that wind can get really, really brutal and really difficult to fish in. Just want to talk about a couple good wind fishing tips, keep you out there and keep you successful in the week ahead. Now, the first thing that I like to think about here is using the topography to my advantage when fishing with the wind. Check out your maps, check out your wind speed and direction, right? And do your best to position yourself on areas of the river with your back against points of elevation that are going to do well to block that wind for you, and that also run perpendicular to the wind direction, right? When we run parallel to the wind direction, especially on these big rivers, it almost functions like a wind tunnel, right? The wind really pushes down that river valley. It's almost impossible to get out. So if we put ourselves, rather than parallel with that wind speed or wind direction, but perpendicular with it, with elevation at our back, a lot of times both that elevation as well as the direction of the river that we're fishing is going to do a ton to block that wind for us, if that makes sense. Now, in terms of tactics, some things are just going to altogether get put out, for a given day. I do find that contact nymphing is super, super hard in the wind. The reason for that is as you're, coming through your drift there, really any speed that the wind is going, whether it's at your back or in your face, it's going to blow a huge bow into that system. It's essentially going to eliminate all the contact you have with your flies. I would say the second you kind of find that happening, I would generally go ahead and switch to an indicator rig. Obviously, when we're contact nymphing, if we don't have that straight physical contact to the flies, we're really not, doing what we need to do to be fishing that system correctly. In terms of indicator nymphing, it can be challenging for sure. I do think there's a couple, hard and fast tips that can really help make it easier for you in wind. First and foremost, the higher the rig gets up into the air, the more it's going to catch wind, the less aerodynamic it's going to be, the more it's just going to get killed and fall straight to the water, right? One thing that you can really kind of employ to start fighting that immediately is rather than having our casting stroke be upside, let's bring it on more of a sidearm angle, right? Again, lower to the water that rig is going to fly, the better it's going to push through that wind. Now, in terms of casting itself, I find that, standard fly cast with a back cast and a forecast can be almost impossible in wind. Even if you're able to power through it, a lot of times, especially on deeper indicator rigs, a lot of times those flies are going to bolo around each other. It's going to make a whole mess. You're just going to spend your entire day untangling. So what I like to do instead is what we'll call a water-loaded cast, a back-loaded cast, a downstream cast, whatever you want to call it, right? I hope you can hear me just to demo this a little bit for those who may be unfamiliar, right? So when we're doing our standard fly cast, we obviously have a forecast into a back cast into a forecast, right? Now what I'm saying is in the wind, a lot of times it's not going to be possible. It's going to have that rig too high. We're going to get held up. We're going to tangle, all that kind of stuff. So instead, what I recommend doing is doing this water or downstream loaded cast. Instead of having a forecast into a back cast and all that, we're just going to let our rig run downstream of us like I have right here, right? We're going to draw that rig up to the surface so our flies don't sink too far down. We're not having too much water pressure pushed down on us. We're going to draw it to the surface and then come straight forward. What that's going to do is it's going to actually have that rig moving a lot faster with a lot more power than it would if we're just standard fly casting up above our heads like this. Also, like we said before, generally that presentation is going to have the rig moving at a much lower height off of the water rather than up high with a standard cast where we're going to tangle, we're going to be less aerodynamic, all that kind of stuff. Now, of course, once we've gotten the rig out there, no matter how we're going to choose to cast it, of course, mending, system management, all that is also going to be challenged in the wind. My big thing, windless or not, is mending, and all of that system management needs to be proactive rather than reactive. If we're reacting to bows and bellies in our line, usually it's going to be too late, right? Without moving that indicator and causing a drag in the system and all that kind of stuff. So what I'll say is put it in your cast, right? Reach casting is your best friend in wind. Cheat that line upstream or downstream as necessary so that it's already in the position it needs to be as we come through the drift, and we don't really need to be throwing mends into the wind. Throw aerial mends in, right? After we stop on that forecast, go ahead and throw an aerial mend in, whether that's just a general curve mend, whether we're throwing an S mend into that, or whatever we're doing based on the situation, give that a try as well. Be proactive rather than reactive. Cheat the system as much as you can in advance without having to do it once you're in the drift on the surface of the water. Now, when all else fails in terms of nymphing, the next step that I would probably be at would be swinging streamers. You could strip. I find that at this time of year, these fish are definitely still in a wintering mood. The overnights are still really cold. This water is absolutely freezing still. I generally find that fish are a little less willing to pursue strip presentations. That's not a hard and fast rule. Of course, there's exceptions, but I do generally find at this time that a swung streamer presentation with a heavy fly is going to probably be your best bet. The beauty of swinging is that, pretty much all of that fly line is in the water. We're obviously not really worried too much about drag. In fact, dragging our streamer across the current is actually kind of the goal when we're swinging. So almost our entire system is out, kind of out of the influence of the wind, if that makes sense. Like I said, I do really encourage using a heavy fly. When we're casting it, that heavy fly is going to punch through that wind much, much better. It should get right through it. And then also, once we're actually fishing it, it's going to do a much better job of getting down to that depth, where a lot of these, late winter fish are still spending their time before they start to move higher in the column as spring gets on here. Now, when all else fails, there are some days on the bigger rivers like the Dee here where the wind can just be too much. It can just completely overpower you, even if you are able to get a rig through it. I mean, sometimes even for your own mental capacity, all that kind of stuff, it can just be too frustrating. It can be freezing, just absolutely brutal to fish through. Where I would turn next, if you're not willing to just go back to the tie and bench and keep tying for the rest of winter, where I would turn next is get up into those tributary creeks that come off these bigger rivers, right? Usually these creeks are running through pretty deeply cut mountain valleys, oftentimes through forests. There's a lot of wind obstruction along a lot of these creeks. You'll be surprised, right? Especially if you don't spend much time in the creeks, just how much of a conditions break you do get in these smaller systems. These, of course, are not hard and fast rules. You will probably find exceptions in all of this all over the river, just like most things in fishing. We do hope that you find these tips helpful for you as you do kind of contend with some wind here for the next few weeks as winter turns into spring. You have any questions about that, make sure to reach out, and we hope to see you soon.